Have you ever found yourself asking that huge, universal question, why do we suffer? Why is life so often a mix of struggle, pain, and loss? Well, you're not alone. About 2,500 years ago, one person decided to treat this not as a philosophical mystery, but as a solvable problem. He launched this incredible investigation, not based on faith, but on looking directly at how our reality is built, moment by moment. Today, we're going to follow that exact evidence trail. So this whole investigation, it didn't start with some abstract idea. It started with the raw, unavoidable facts of life. The Buddha, back when he was a seeker named Vipassana, looked around and saw what we all see. Everyone gets old, everyone gets sick, and everyone eventually dies. But instead of just shrugging his shoulders and saying, well, that's life, he treated it like a detective treats a crime scene. He asked a simple forensic question, what is the necessary condition for this to happen? So how do you even begin to unravel a problem as big as existence itself? Well, you don't start at the beginning and guess your way forward. You do what any good investigator does. You start at the end, with suffering, and you trace the evidence backward, one link at a time. It's kind of like reverse engineering reality itself. All right, let's get into it. Okay, first question on the table. What is the one thing that has to exist for aging and death, or Jara Maranam, to even be a possibility? Think about it. If you wanted to get rid of aging and death completely, what's the one single event you would have to prevent from ever happening?
And with clear, focused attention, the answer became obvious: birth, or in Pali, jati. You see, without birth, there can be no aging, and there can be no death. It's just that simple. And this revealed the fundamental logic of the whole system. When this exists, that comes to be. It's a straightforward law of cause and effect, of conditionality.
So naturally, that leads to the very next question. If death depends on birth, what does birth depend on? What's the force, the energy, that actually kicks off a new existence? We're peeling back another layer of the onion here. The condition for birth, it turns out, is bhavo. You can think of this as becoming or existence. It's this relentless forward momentum, this drive for life to continue, to become something else, to keep the wheels spinning. This ongoing process of becoming is what eventually leads to birth. So, what fuels that momentum? And this is where the investigation gets really interesting, because it turns from the external world to the inner world of our own minds. That momentum of becoming is fueled by something called upadhanam, which means grasping or clinging. And what makes us grasp onto things? Well, that's tanha, or craving, that intense thirst for what feels good and that powerful urge to push away what feels bad. And where does craving itself come from? It's triggered by vedana, the raw, simple feeling that arises with every experience, pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. Okay, this is a huge pivot point. We've just traced all this big existential suffering all the way back to something as simple and immediate as a fleeting feeling. But where do those feelings even come from? How does that inner world of sensation get created in the first place? The answer is phaso, or contact. See, a feeling doesn't just pop up out of thin air. It sparks into life at the exact moment one of our senses, like our eyes or our ears, makes contact with an object, like a color or a sound. That meeting, that little impact, that's contact. And from that spark, a feeling is instantly born. And this just lays out the internal machinery so brilliantly. For that contact to even happen, you need the hardware, right? You need the salayatan, the 6 sense spaces, the eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind. And for those to work, you need nama-rupam, mind and matter, basically the whole mind-body organism. And what's the power source that animates all of this? That would be vijnanam, or consciousness, that basic awareness that just knows something is there. So look how far we've come. We've followed the breadcrumbs all the way from death itself down to the very arising of consciousness. But there's one last critical piece of the puzzle. What's the ultimate condition? What's the ignition key that turns this whole neutral process into a cycle of suffering? The ultimate source, the very root of the entire thing, is avijja. Now, this doesn't just mean ignorance, like not knowing a fact. It's a much deeper unawareness, a fundamental misunderstanding of how reality actually works. It's this cloudy vision that becomes the condition for sankhara, our choices, our intentions, our mental fabrications, which then kick consciousness into gear, starting the whole cycle all over again. This is the engine. So, once all the evidence was in, it wasn't just a random list of causes. No, it revealed this precise, interconnected system, a perfect schematic for how suffering is generated. Let's step back and look at the full blueprint. And here it is, paṭiccasamuppāda, or dependent origination. It works just like dominoes. Conditioned by unawareness, our mental formations arise. They fall and knock over consciousness, which knocks over mind and matter, the senses, contact, feeling, craving, grasping, becoming, all the way down the line to birth, which, of course, leads directly to aging and death. This, the Buddha said, is how this entire mass of suffering comes to be. Now, you might think uncovering this would be depressing, right? But the texts say it was a moment of incredible light. Samudayo, samudayo, he said. Origin, origin. He wasn't bummed out. He was empowered. Because for the very first time, the problem of suffering wasn't some unsolvable mystery anymore. It was an equation. And if it's an equation, it can be solved. And that, right there, is the absolute game changer. Because once you have the blueprint for how something is built, you also have the instructions for how to take it apart. The discovery of how the chain is formed was also the discovery of how to break it. This is where we find the path to freedom. The logic here is just beautiful and perfectly symmetrical. When this ceases, that ceases. It's that simple. When you replace unawareness with wisdom, when you see things clearly, those reactive formations just stop. And when they stop, the type of consciousness that leads to rebirth also stops. You pull out one link, and the next one never forms. The whole chain reaction grinds to a halt. The result? The complete cessation of this entire mass of suffering. Now, it's so important to understand that this teaching isn't some dogma you just have to believe in. It's a practical model of how things work. The Buddha actually presented it as a middle way, a path that skillfully avoids two philosophical traps that were really common back then. And let's be honest, they're still around today. So on one side, you had the people who said, sabba mafi, everything exists. They believed we have a permanent, unchanging soul that just goes on forever. On the other side, you had the sabam nathi camp, nothing exists. They thought that at death, we're just completely wiped out, poof, and our actions don't really matter. The Buddha saw that both of these extreme views just led to more problems. His middle way, dependent origination, just brilliantly sidesteps that whole debate. It shows us a reality that isn't a fixed, static thing, but it's also not a meaningless nothingness. It's a dynamic, flowing process of cause and effect. Nothing exists all on its own, but everything arises when the right conditions come together. And that insight is really the heart of this entire discovery. So after this whole journey, we're left with a really practical question. This chain isn't some dusty, ancient theory. It is the operating system running your experience right now, in this very second. That tiny gap between a feeling arising, a craving popping up, and a choice being made, that's happening all the time. So the question to take with you is this: where in that chain today can you bring just a little more light, just a little more awareness?